I'm Roxanne Carter, and this is block 5 of our 2019 technique sampler. So this month we are learning to do paper piecing. I like to do paper piecing on freezer paper instead of actually sewing on the paper, and there's many reasons that we like that technique. So I learned this technique from the Judy Matheson Mariner Compass Quilt Setting a New Course. So all of this information that I am showing you today is from here. So I'm also using the freezer paper from C&T because I can print right on this paper from my inkjet printer. I can run it right through my machine and print right on there, which is what I have done. And so each of you in class will get one of these papers, as well as the master, in case you want to do regular paper foundation piecing sewing on the paper. If that's more likable for you, then that's the technique you should use. But if you've never tried this before, I really encourage you to try using freezer paper. So several of the reasons we like to use the freezer paper technique is that we're not sewing on the paper, so that it's really easy to peel right off your seams from the back. You can reuse the papers over 4 or 5 times. If you make a mistake, it's really easy to take something out because you just peel the paper back, take your mistake out, and start all over again. It's just one of those really nice ways of learning to do this without having all the stress involved and all that paper all over the floor. Okay, so if you aren't able to come to my class and you don't have a copy done on the freezer paper, you can make your own copies, and it's all talked about in her book. So what I have you do, this is regular freezer paper that you buy at the grocery store, Reynolds Wrap freezer paper, and I cut my pages, 4 papers, 9 by 11, and then we take our master that you will get in class, and we just staple it to the 4 layers of freezer paper, all paper side up. And so I just staple it in several places to hold it in place. And then we're going to we're going to make our own copies. What's really nice about this is that you can make as many copies as you want by doing this technique, and so you're never having to run out and buy more paper. So in doing this technique, you do not want any thread in your top of the machine. You can leave the bobbin in, but you can take it out as well. It doesn't really matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to perforate all of the inside lines. You do not need to do the outside 2 lines of either one of these, but because those are our seam allowance, excuse me. But we're going to sew with a regular stitch length. You do not need to shorten your stitch length. And we're going to sew right on those lines. So this is just perforating the different layers so that we don't have to make copies, and so we can take and just sew all of these lines, and then we'll have all of our lines that we can just fold on from our paper. Okay, so all this is doing is perforating all the lines on our paper so that we have a pattern on the back. You can see that there's there. And now we're going to cut it out. And I just use my regular rotary cutter. And so we're going to take and sew on the outside line of that block. And the outside edge of the paper is actually our seam allowance, so don't worry about the points on that end. It'll be fine being blunted. And then we're going to cut there. And then we're going to cut to the edge of the paper. You can put the 1/4 inch line of the ruler right on that outside, that seam line out there, and then give us a 1/4 inch. But the outside of the paper is also just a 1/4 inch. So now that we have our paper pieces all prepared, we can take out the staples. And I usually leave one end and just pull one in off the back. You want to make sure that you do get rid of these staples or the rotary cutter will hit them and you'll be out of luck. So if we take one of these papers off the back, you can see that they are all perforated around the edges, and it is the same as this one. Now, if you choose to do so, you can mark on here. This is A1, A2, A3, A4, all the way through, and that will tell you what pieces go where. But always keep your master handy so that you can reference what size pieces they are on there. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. There are 4 of the flowers in the quilt and the block. There are 2 of them with accents 1 and 2 as the main flower and accent 4 as a center. And there are 2 of them with accent 2 in the middle and accent 3 and 4 as the flower. So I've laid my pieces out in their piles in the order in which I'm going to sew them. It just makes it a little easier for me. So I have my center from accent 4 and the pieces for my accent 1 and 2, and then my background pieces and my tops. Those are going to make 2 blocks right there. And then I do the same thing over here with the other 2 accents. So this is the center, these are the flowers, and there's all my pieces to make the 2 of those. We make 2 of each. So this is the top one I've already got started for or made for you, just to show you how easy this is to take the freezer paper off. So you can see on the back, I've got my printed copy that I did. And so all we do is we take, when we're done, we just pick up your little pieces and we peel it right off. So there's no little extra pieces that we have to use for that. So then we can take this one and reuse it again many times. Before we do that though, I want to show you that we need to get rid of the shininess of the freezer paper. So there is a shiny side to the freezer paper, and we want to make sure that we take that and we press it down to our ironing board to get rid of the shiny effect, the shiny side. The presser foot of your walking foot, or any foot that you're using, that's interesting. So we're going to iron down the shiny side of the paper to our pressing mat. And I just discovered that you do not want to do this with the wool mat, because when we peel that off, you can see that it's dulled down. But when I did it to the wool mat, it takes a lot of the fibers, and we might not be able to use that piece as many times as we can reuse this one. So always remember, don't use your wool mat for pressing down. Okay, so you're going to get your pattern for making the block. It pretty much just describes what I'm going to say. So I'm going to set that aside for right now, but you can read that when you get your pattern. You're also going to get your master and a copy of the freezer paper piece. So very first thing I did is I laid out my pieces in order as I'm going to use them. Accent 4, I'm going to make the first block with accent 1 as the flower and accent 4 as my center, which is what I have here. And so there's the 2 by 3, the 3.5, 2 by 3.5, 2 by 4, 2.5 by 4, and 2.5 by 6. So those are all my little accent pieces. These are the background pieces that are going to be used. So to start this block, we're going to take our, the @1/4 rulers are wonderful to use. There are 2 sizes. So I prefer the little one because it's just nice and short, easy to use. And I also have a little piece of cardboard here that if you are using the master that I gave you on freezer paper, it just really helps to have that little cardboard there so we can fold it right on the paper. So we're going to start with our pieces 1 and 2. And so 2 is our background, the 2 by 3, 2.5. Oops. And our accent 1, our accent 4 flower, piece 1. The first piece always goes face down. The rest of them will always be right side up. So I'm going to take this over to my ironing board and I'm going to iron the very first piece. I'm going to fold back on that line between 1 and 2, and I'm going to put this down so that the piece that's underneath is completely covered, and I'm 1/4 inch away from the edge of my fabric. So I'm a 1/4 inch above. I've got at least a 1/4 inch below. The piece is big enough that you don't have to worry about it. Then we're gonna iron that down so that it sticks right to my paper. Then I'm gonna fold it back on that seam line right there between 1 and 2. And I'm gonna now add my background piece. So we sew with a 1/4 inch seam. We're going to sew right next to the fold of the paper. I want to put this piece right on top of there so that I've got at least a 1/4 inch above and below the folded back piece that I can see. It's right there, and so I'm going to line up those edges even. And then I'm going to sew right next to the paper, but I got to thread my machine. So make sure you thread your machine. That's an often common mistake after we perforated our papers. So now we're going to sew right next to the fold of the paper. Our fold of the paper is right there. I am not sewing on it, but I am sewing right next to the fold of the paper. So you can see that it's right next to there, and I'm going to cut my thread here. And so you can see I'm going to now fold my paper out. I am going to just finger press this over from the front side. And now we have to take it over to the ironing board, and we have to put the iron to the freezer paper to make it stick to the fabric. So I'm going to press from the front side, press it over, and then just put the iron to that piece on the back side. And you see that it sticks. So then we come over and we're going to now use our add a 1/4 ruler. We're going to fold back the paper on the line between 1 and 3. We put the ruler so that it's right against that fold of the paper, and we're going to trim. Okay, so now I'm going to add my next background piece. So this is the same size piece, 2 by 3.5, or 2 by 2.5, and we're going to just line up the edges even right there again, so that I can see my pattern through the paper. I can see that it is going to be on the fabric. I'm going to move that up just a tad bit because that's a little low there. You just want to make sure that you've got enough room there and there to have a seam allowance. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to sew that seam right next to the freezer paper. And again, fold the paper back, fold the piece over. Our motto is sew, press, trim. So we've sewn, now we're going to press, and then we're going to trim for the next piece. So press that back on the front side, then press it on the back side. Always remembering that you have to press the iron to the freezer paper to make it stick to the fabric. Our next third piece, or fourth piece actually, is our triangle, our 3-inch triangles. And so now we're going to take and we're going to use our add a 1/4 ruler to get it ready for the piece. We're going to cut those edges off. And now I'm going to take my 3-inch square that I cut once diagonally, and I'm going to center that little piece right on there, and I'm going to sew again that seam. Okay, so now we're going to add our 5th piece, which is our 2 by 3.5 inch inner flower, which is my accent 2 piece from my sampler. And so the first thing I need to do is we've sewn, we've pressed, now we're going to trim. Sew, press, trim. And now we're going to take and center this one. And I also want to take and trim right next to the paper on the outside edge. That'll kind of help you keep these pieces lined up correctly. So now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to match it up to the top because that is our seam allowance now, and I know that that piece is going to fit right there. So we're going to sew right next to that now. So again, finger press this piece back, take it over the iron and iron it down. You're going to continue that same process to get this whole flower made. And then I'm going to show you another step. Okay, so the corners, the outside edges of the flower, what's going to make the outside edges where the flower float, are interesting to put on. I just want to make sure you know how to add these pieces. So, but I've sewn one on, but I'm going to show you how to place this one. So this one is always, again, right side up. But you want to make sure that the piece of paper that's folded back is covered by the piece underneath. It's always important in any paper piecing that you're doing is that the piece is folded back is covered by the piece underneath. The little tip doesn't have to be covered because, you know, as you see here, it's going to get cut off in the seam allowance, but at least this much is covered. So I will sew that one on, and then you will have it like this. Press it to your paper, and then we'll trim it all the way around. Okay, so now that I have both of my pieces sewn on, I'm going to finish trimming the edge of the block. We're just going to trim, I can use a regular ruler now, right to the outside edge of the paper. And then do the same thing on my sides here. There. And so that is now ready. And so if we want to use the paper again, we just take and peel our right off the paper. So now I have both of my accent 1 stars made, or flowers made. And so now I can go on to make the other 2 accent 3 and 4 stars flowers. Okay, so here I made one of the bottoms. All 4 of the bottom of the leaves and the stems are all the same. So you can make those all exactly the same. There's no combinations of those. What we're going to do is we're going to start with our pieces just like we did before, adding all of the pieces as we go out. But I really wanted to show you the end pieces because it's very important how to place this last piece. So I've got my little leaves already trimmed here, adding to my next piece. You want to make sure that you place this one so that when you lay this piece down, this piece of freezer paper will always be covered by the piece of fabric that we're adding. It's very important that you know that. So now I can take and I can sew that piece on. Then fold my paper out, and this piece is going to be completely covered by that piece of fabric. If you don't have it covered, you need to take it off and put it back on so that you do have it. There's a lot of waste at the bottom, but we really want to make sure that the paper is covered. And we're going to do the same thing on this side now. So the first thing I'm going to do is press this on here to hold it down. You also want to make sure you have a hot iron. A cool iron is not going to do it for you. So there, I fold my paper back between my background and my leaf portion. I'm going to take my add a 1/4 ruler, trim my piece, and I'm going to add my next and last piece, or second to last piece here. But see, if I put it up to the top, that paper is not going to fit. So I need to pull this down so that that paper fits right onto that piece of fabric. So now that I've got that done, I can fold this over and then I can just continue with my pieces there. You just want to make sure you've got enough fabric above that center line on all your pieces. Now the next piece I'll do is I'll fold this one back, add my 1/4 inch, and I'll trim here. And I'll go ahead and trim my outside edges here. right to the edge of the paper. Oops. Edge of the paper. And now I'm going to fold this piece back, and this is where our main print comes in. So now I'm going to put my main print down, and I'm going to put that right centered on there so that it's evenly spaced on both sides. And now I'm just going to go ahead and sew across there, and this is what we end up with right here. Okay, now that I've got it all trimmed, I'm going to take and I'm going to just start by pulling this away from the seams, and there's your piece. And now we're going to take and sew these pieces to these pieces and just center them and sew right across there, and then we have our block. And you'll make 4 of these, 2 of each color combination for the top. So this is all 4 blocks sewn together. And then you add your 2.5-inch framing strips to finish the block out. And thank you for joining me on this block 5.